Alright, Chapter 9, setting of the valves. Object of the valve setting for the moment of the slide valve with the definition of lap, lead, or travel over the valve together in an explanation of the piston at the steam with its off cut with exhaust open for the compression steam. Begin with explain with the steam railway, locomotive with the steam engine for the valve gears, and the distribution for the steam of the locomotion. Location essential for the point of the cutoff, the release, etc. Settle for the drawing off of the engine design, but the direction of the valve gear with a small and quality difference occur with the object of the valve is in vertically to the difference of more, especially with the view of the producing as near the off as possible, equal the distance for the steam in front of the back end of the cylinders, and the rectifications are made with a slight alteration of the length of the valve spindles and eccentric rods. It should be, however, pointed out that it is impossible to obtain the exactly equal the distribution of the steam of the two ends of the cylinder, owing to the effect of the angular oblique with the connection rod if the connection rod moved. Bodily direction for the parallel, the stroke of the piston point with the cutoff of the steam would be the same with both ends of the cylinder, owing to the slopping position with the rod. Necessarily, the occupied with the point of the cutoff is later for the outstroke of the when the position moving toward the crank axle, then the in-stroke of what is the moving away from the axle. For example, the valve carb with a certain location, locomotive show within the full gear with the position moving an 18 3/4 of an inch out of the stroke, the total stroke being 24 inches, both before the steam was cut off, but on the return of the inward stroke of the cutoff, then curved within the piston tread travel with only 16 1/4 inches. System and valve settings. It is possible to set the valve with the three different systems that can be being dependent upon one of the three variables which affect the steam distribution. These are equalizing lead at the front and the back, equalizing port, opening the front and back, and three equalizing point of the cutoff at the front and back with the third. These, if they involve the unequal lap, are rarely adopted with locomotives and need not be further considered on the other. Of the two others, the system's equalizing leads is usually gives a more nearly equal compression of the steam at the two ends of the stroke. Bumping marks and clearance. If the piston were allowed to travel far enough to each end of the cylinder, it would bump the cylinder cover. The engine is designed to that does not take place with a space of about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch, known as the clearance of the allowed between the piston of the cylinder and each end of the strokes. And if the movement of the piston over the crosshead connection with the piston rod is exactly the same, and all the measurements of the piston stroke may be taken with the crosshead relative to the slide bars, the bumping marks are described with the slide bars for each end before the connection rod is put up, pushing the piston with the hand of each of these as far as with the go of the strike of the cover, the marking of the position, one end of the crosshead slide block of the bars when connecting the rods in motion would have been put up and the wheels revolved. The described below terminal position of the slide blocks for the distance of the bumping of the marks at the end of each of the above the clearances. To set the valve is found the more convenient with the two-turn wheels and means of the following: with a signal apparatus to move the engine backwards, forward, down the length of the timeline outside of the shop. Two brackets are fixed beside the rail within one each side of the pit over which for the engine is built. The brackets have bearings in which for the rollers are fitted with the engine is lifted slightly with the circle for the driving. The wheels rest on the rollers. So the rollers are revolved with the means of the shaft which lies across the pit. Shafts being provided with a ratchet. For 4 long lever arms, the ladder is being pulled around with the man stationed with the pit during the valve setting process. The rollers cause the driving wheels to revolve only one small portion of the revolution necessary to one movement of the valve setting. The wheels must be turned in the proper direction for the setting of the valves forward and be a backward gear. Setting the valves. Before the eccentric rack for the coupled with expansion link for the points of which the valve closed ports of the same are marked upon the valve spindles. A very thin piece of the 10A, figure 43-1, is held with the front portion of the valve. With the valve, the rods move carefully with against it. The valve spindle S is then marked on at the A1 outside of the steam chest, means with the trammel T with a straight point end of which is placed in the century pop made with the back of the steam chest cover the right angle. Then inscribed the mark A1 on the valve spindle. Small pop is made with a smart sharp punch for the show of the position of the mark, the similar to the point A2 with which the valve crosses the port A2 at the other end of this mark with a transferring 10 later portion. Port and pushing the valve the opposite direction against the two pops A1 and A2 with the spindle shop showing the position over the later of the seam cut off of the C. That these are the points which are the valve closed to the port. The eccentric rods are then coupled up in the dead century for the exact points at which the piston reached the two ends of the stroke was to be found, with it being noted that there are 4 dead centers of the two for each of the side of the ends of the valve setting is one side over the other. It will be sufficient to describe one side only. Alright, figure 43, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Marking of the valve spindle with the valve setting. Or the driving wheel 44 was turned with the direction arrow of the forward motion with the slide block even nearly not quite at the front end of the stroke with the shown with the illustration of the crank with the occupy the position shown in C1 with the extremely end with the stroke with the edge for the side block. Retrieve the dotted line A with the A sign punch mark with the P with the made with the side block with any similar mark with the S on the side of the slide bar of the pair of the compass for the then set with the distance of the P and S and the center punch mark with the make with the mark made with the engine frame with the Q near the driving the wheel and marked with the M2 with is made with a pair with the compass of the trammel and the tyree with the wheels to slowly to revolve with the slide block D to reach the end of the stroke A, then begin with the opposite direction towards the crank of the band with the pick keeps with the compass with the at the PS over the one point with the S is shown with the other point of the entrance of the pot mark with the P for the rotation and stop with the trammel having one point with the Q and Q with the second mark M2 with the made with the tyree with the first mark have with the move with the position M1. If the crank gets moved around the C1 and C2, the distance of M1 and M2 with the tyree is involved with the equally with the pop is made with the mark M of the century. So figure 44 shows finally dead centers. Line between M1 and M2 with the wheel to move with the back of the position, C1 with the crank it again with the move forward with the trammel, the one leg with the Q exactly equal each of the M from which the other out point of the M with the M will now occupy the position of the M2 have the illustration position with the crank will now be after the edge of the slide block being of the end with the stroke of the A with the front end of the dead center with the back dead center with the B is found similar with the turning of the wheel through the half of the revolution turn forward. Further dead center is also marked within the crank of the opposite side of the engine and may be added with above the somewhat elaborate method is necessary because it in particular impossible to find the dead center with a sufficient accurately with merely watching with a crosshead making the point with the later of the beginning with the reverse direction of the motion. The motion is crosshead near the dead center is and very slow and the crank will move through the small engine without apparently moving the crosshead. The engine has been set on the front dead center of the crank. Go after the being setting with the wheel with the trammel, the pops, Q and M with the front port which should be open to slide amount of the A1 and B2 and figure 43.3 with the valve with the lead of the front end with the mark with the valve trammel with the valve with the spindle B1 at the distance A1 and B1 therefore equal to capital A1 B1. These marks with the spindles are also shown in figure 43.4 with the similar marks of B2 is also made at the lead opposite end with the crank of the back dead center with the position B with the figure 44 lead with the back end, but therefore equal the distance between the head marks A2 and B2 and the end of the spindle figure 43.4 with the sum of the works of the lower measure with the marking with the valve spindle by pressing with the wedge with the finishes with A1 B1 between the edge of the valve of the port so that the edges have leave the marks on the wedges which may be measured. In the front leave of the A1 B1 is equal to A2 B2 with the back of the valve with the probably set to the equal leave with no further adjustment necessary of the however the leads of the A1 B1 4 gear with the front saying 1/16 of an inch with the AB2 B2. At the back, it says about 3/16 of an inch. The valve requires adjusting to the front gear eccentric rod with the taken down with the jump and shortened with the Smith shop within the 1/16 of an inch to creep the opening of the A1 B1 over the distance to A1 B1 front end with the A1 1/16 of the 1/8 of an inch decreasing A2 to B2 from 3/16 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch so that the leads are more equal to similar in the lead with the back end of the smaller than the front with the eccentric rod has been length slightly. Some of the inches are arranged with the valve spindle with the having screw with the nut with which can be adjusted to the length of the shortening of the spindle instead of the alternating of the length of the eccentric rod. The maximum port of the opening of the valve at the end of the stroke of the also known with the marked with the valve spindle with the valve spindle is blackened on a suit with the lamp so that marks made with the trammel may be seen easily over the end of the valve with the travel that approach with when the wheels rotate with the trammel T with the plate that's shown with the pop and the steam shaft with the cover the figure 43.1. The vertical point is repass across the valve spindle at the later move to the later reverse of its direction movement of the line limiting position given the figure line C1 with the 43.4 with the mark with the spindle of the distance A1 C1 maximum port opening with the front end with the A2 C2 with the port opening with the back end with the valve that are set to equal the port openings instead of the equal leads. Adjustments of such A1 and A1 C1 is made with the A2 C2. In the case of a slight difference, the leads in front and back ends of them. It may be noted that the reversing lever does not show up when running in order to expand the steam cylinders. The lead increases Stemson link of the moving that have been open and eccentric rod with the instant with the engine with the wood have the valves equal leads with the 1/8 of an inch, which in the full of the gear with the full forward gear with the may have lead with the 1/4 inch with the fully with the natural the move over the link of the motion with the done suspend with the lead with the both ends not equal to the reversing lever in the latter position with the equal. Therefore, usually with the valve to be set with the equal leads with the reversing gear with its place in the notch position or position when at which the engine runs most of the time instead of the setting of through the lever in the full forward gear. But the valves are also also tried in the back gear, with which the engine run is tender first. In this case, however, the tender engine and the running down with the tender first is comparatively smaller in amount of the segment of the valve of the back gear, with sometimes less, unless inequalities between the front and the back of the cylinder is very pronounced, in which the case the adjustment is made with the back eccentric guide rod, which involved a slight with the alteration steam distribution gear. The final lever of the valve has been set with a position crosshead, which are equivalent to the position or measured with the slide bearing bars corresponding with the 4 points: 1 steam cutoff, 2 exhaust openings, 3 exhaust closes, 4 compression beginnings, owing the obliquity to the connection rod of the 3 point positions, different with outward and inward stroke for the position, and record for these measurements is kept with every engine. Chapter 10: Inspection and Testing.